On a rain-soaked evening in March of 1847, witnesses claimed to hear screams echoing from the Rutherford plantation house, screams that would haunt Spotsylvania County for generations. A gentleman's poker game between tobacco planters is what it began as, but it ended in a wager so unthinkable, so morally devastating, that local authorities buried every related document for over a century. Human lives were the stakes, not money or land. And when the final card was revealed, the consequences would ripple through Virginia's most powerful families, leaving behind a trail of mysterious deaths, financial ruin, and a conspiracy of silence that reached the highest levels of state government. Before we dive deeper into this disturbing tale from Virginia's darkest chapter, before we continue with the story of the Rutherford estate and the game that destroyed everything, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more shocking historical mysteries. Let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. We love connecting with fellow history lovers who aren't afraid of the darker truths. How the wealthy plantation families of Spotsylvania County viewed each other, and more importantly, how they viewed themselves, would be forever changed by what happened that night. In 1847, Spotsylvania County stood as one of Virginia's most prosperous tobacco regions, where vast plantations stretched along the Rappahannock River like green kingdoms ruled by men who believed their wealth made them untouchable. Some of the finest tobacco leaves in the American South were produced by the soil, enriched by decades of careful cultivation, filling the coffers of families whose names appeared on bank charters, railroad companies, and political appointments throughout the Commonwealth. Over 3,000 acres of this prime land were commanded by the Rutherford plantation, known locally as Thorngate Manor. Along with nearly 200 enslaved workers whose labor had built the family fortune over 3 generations, Colonel Harrison Rutherford had inherited the estate from his father. Atop a gentle hill overlooking the tobacco fields that stretched toward the horizon like an endless sea of green sat the main house, an imposing Georgian mansion with towering white columns and expansive verandas. 43 years old was Harrison Rutherford in the spring of 1847. A man whose success had been measured not just in acres and profit, but in his ability to maintain the delicate social networks that kept Virginia's plantation aristocracy functioning. He held shares in the Richmond and Rappahannock Railroad, served on the county board, and his opinions on tobacco prices could influence markets as far north as New York. But perhaps most importantly to Harrison, he was the father of Margaret Rutherford, 18 years old and considered by many to be the most beautiful young woman in 3 counties. The refined education expected of a planter's daughter was possessed by Margaret. She spoke French, played piano with remarkable skill, and could discuss literature with a sophistication that made her a sought-after guest at social gatherings throughout central Virginia. Marriage proposals from the sons of prominent families had already been attracted by her dark auburn hair and intelligent green eyes, though Harrison had been selective about which suitors he would even allow to call upon her. Also included in the Rutherford household was Caesar Wellington, a man whose very existence challenged every assumption about slavery in antebellum Virginia. 35 years old was Caesar, born on the plantation, and he had learned to read and write despite laws prohibiting such education for enslaved people. More remarkably, an extraordinary talent for mathematics and what we might now call financial analysis had been developed by Caesar. Years earlier, Harrison had discovered this ability, and in a decision that scandalized some of his neighbors, had begun using Caesar to help manage the plantation's books and even advise on investment decisions. Incredibly profitable for Harrison, this arrangement had proven to be, but it had also created something unprecedented in their social order, a master who had come to depend intellectually on a man he legally owned. Better conditions than most enslaved people were lived in by Caesar, occupying a small but comfortable room in the main house rather than the quarters, and Harrison often found himself seeking Caesar's counsel on matters that extended far beyond plantation management. Harrison's regular poker companions were the other key players in our story, men whose weekly games had become legendary among Spotsylvania County's elite. There was Judge Cornelius Petton, whose family had helped write Virginia's state constitution and whose legal decisions carried weight throughout the Commonwealth. The largest plantation adjacent to Harrison's was owned by Dr. Samuel Fitzgerald, who served as the informal physician to most of the wealthy families in the area. Finally, there was Marcus Bogard, a newer addition to their circle, who had moved to Virginia from Charleston after inheriting significant holdings and whose reputation for high-stakes gambling was matched only by his skill at reading people's weaknesses. For over 2 years, These four men had been meeting every Thursday evening, playing poker in Harrison's study while consuming the finest bourbon and cigars available. Over time, the stakes had gradually increased, moving from modest wages of a few dollars to games where hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars changed hands in a single evening. But money, they all understood, was merely the surface of their real competition. About power were these games, about testing each other's resolve, about the psychological warfare that successful men wage among themselves. A perfect storm for what was about to unfold was created by the social dynamics of 1847 Virginia. Signs of strain were being shown by the state's economy as tobacco prices fluctuated and Northern criticism of slavery intensified. Though admitting such concerns publicly would have been social suicide, many plantation owners were quietly concerned about their long-term financial stability. Growing tension also existed about the expansion of slavery into new territories, with political debates that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of Southern society. Like any other Thursday at Thorngate Manor began the evening of March 18, 1847. Steadily since morning, rain had been falling, creating a rhythmic drumbeat against the tall windows of Harrison's study. Everything about Virginia plantation luxury was embodied by the room itself. Mahogany furniture that gleamed in the lamplight, leather-bound books lining the walls, and a marble fireplace where seasoned oak logs crackled and hissed, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. As usual, Caesar had prepared the room, arranging the poker table with its green felt surface, placing fresh decks of cards at Harrison's right hand, and ensuring that crystal decanters of bourbon and brandy were filled and ready. With the quiet efficiency that had made him invaluable to Harrison, the enslaved man moved through these preparations, but those who knew him well might have noticed something different that evening: a tension in his movements, a way his eyes lingered on certain objects in the room. First to arrive was Judge Peaton, shaking rain from his coat while complaining about the condition of the roads. The eldest of their group at 62, he was a man whose legal mind had helped shape Virginia's response to various constitutional challenges over the past 2 decades. A sort of informal blessing was served by his presence at these games. It meant you had truly arrived in Virginia society if Cornelius Peaton was willing to gamble with you. Next came Dr. Fitzgerald, carrying his medical bag as always, since calls could come at any hour when dealing with the health needs of hundreds of people across multiple plantations. Known for his conservative play style and his ability to read physical tells in other players was Samuel, skills that served him well both at the poker table and in diagnosing illnesses. The last to arrive was Marcus Bogard, and his entrance immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. At 39, Marcus possessed the kind of magnetic personality that drew people in while simultaneously making them slightly uncomfortable. He had been educated at the College of Charleston, spent several years in New Orleans learning what he called the gentleman's arts, and had returned to Virginia with enough wealth and connections to purchase significant holdings, though no one seemed entirely clear on the exact sources of his fortune. "Gentlemen," Marcus announced as he settled into his usual chair, "I hope you're prepared for a memorable evening. I've been feeling particularly fortunate lately." While Caesar moved silently around the room, refilling glasses and ensuring the fire remained strong, Harrison dealt the first hand. Normally, the early games proceeded, with modest pots and the usual conversation about tobacco prices, politics, and county gossip. But as the evening progressed and the bourbon began to take effect, something shifted in the room's dynamic. For the first 2 hours, Marcus had been losing steadily, and those who knew his temperament recognized the signs of his growing frustration. He began making larger bets, trying to recover his losses through increasingly aggressive play. Content to watch the drama unfold between the other 3 players, Judge Peaton folded early from most hands. His conservative approach was maintained by Dr. Fitzgerald, winning small pots consistently, but avoiding major confrontations. Throughout the evening, Harrison found himself holding unusually strong hands, and his confidence grew with each winning pot. A substantial sum that represented several months of income for most Virginia families was what he was ahead by nearly $800 by 10 o'clock. Then it was that Marcus made a suggestion that would forever change their lives. "Harrison, my friend," Marcus said, shuffling a fresh deck with the smooth movements of someone who had spent considerable time around gambling tables, "I'm growing tired of these small stakes. What do you say we make this evening truly interesting? What did you have in mind?" Harrison asked, though something in Marcus' tone made Caesar pause in his movement around the room. I propose we play one final hand. Winner takes everything on the table. Plus, Marcus paused, letting the silence build tension, plus something more valuable than money. Judge Peyton leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we each put up something that truly matters to us, something that would make this game memorable. Marcus' eyes glittered in the lamplight as he looked around the table. I'll put up my Charleston properties, the rice plantation and the house on East Bay Street, worth over $15,000. Except for the sound of rain against the windows and the crackling fire, the room fell silent. An enormous sum, enough to buy a substantial plantation or fund a small railroad, was $15,000. Marcus, that's far beyond what any of us can match. Dr. Fitzgerald shook his head. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Samuel, Marcus replied. Each of you has something worth that much or more. You just haven't been thinking creatively enough. A strange excitement building in his chest was felt by Harrison. The bourbon, combined with his evening of successful play, had filled him with a sense of invincibility. What did you have in mind, Marcus? Judge Peyton could put up his legal practice and all the associated political connections. Dr. Fitzgerald could wager his medical practice and his plantation. And you, Harrison, Marcus' smile grew wider, though it never reached his eyes, you could put up the thing that's truly most valuable to you, which would be your daughter's hand in marriage. Like smoke from the fireplace, the words hung in the air. Completely frozen was Caesar, who had been refilling the brandy decanter. Pale went Judge Peyton's face while Dr. Fitzgerald actually gasped audibly. To laugh was Harrison's first instinct, to dismiss the suggestion as the bourbon talking. But something about the way Marcus was looking at him, something about the challenge implicit in the suggestion, made him pause. A measure of his power was considered a man's ability to control his family's destiny in the social hierarchy of 1847 Virginia. Weakness might be seen as to refuse such a wager, as an admission that he wasn't confident in his own abilities. Marcus, Judge Peyton said carefully, you're suggesting something that goes far beyond gambling. A young woman's life shouldn't be wagered like property. Isn't it? Marcus asked. Don't we already arrange marriages based on financial and social considerations? At least this way, the decision would be made by skill rather than backroom negotiations. Though a rational part of his mind screamed warnings, Harrison found himself actually considering the proposal. Beautiful, intelligent, and destined for a marriage that would strengthen the Rutherford family's position in Virginia society, Margaret was indeed his most precious possession. But she was also 18 years old and Harrison had ultimate legal authority over her future. The law was clear on this point. Fathers had the right to arrange their daughters' marriages as they saw fit. And if I were to agree to such terms, Harrison heard himself saying, what would you put up to match such a stake? Leaning back in his chair, Marcus did so, and for a moment his mask of southern gentility slipped entirely. Something harder, more calculating was what showed underneath. I would put up Caesar. The room erupted. So quickly did Judge Peyton stand up that his chair nearly toppled backward. Dr. Fitzgerald began to protest, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. Think about it logically, gentlemen. A significant financial asset is represented by Caesar, perhaps Harrison's most valuable single piece of property after the land itself. More importantly, skills and knowledge that make him irreplaceable are possessed by Caesar. In ways that go far beyond normal master-slave relationships, Harrison depends on him. Losing Caesar would be devastating to the plantation's operations. Realizing that the man had been observing their household dynamic far more carefully than anyone had suspected, Harrison stared at Marcus. It was true. Not just to the plantation's financial management, but to Harrison's sense of intellectual equality, Caesar had become indispensable. One of Harrison's greatest pleasures had become their evening conversations about business strategy and investment opportunities. But there was something else in Marcus' proposal, something that made Harrison's blood run cold, even as it excited him. Essentially offering to give Harrison permanent ownership over another human being's exceptional abilities was Marcus by wagering Caesar. If Harrison won, he would not only keep his daughter, but also gain complete control over Marcus' legal claim to Caesar, effectively doubling down on his investment in human property. Near the brandy table, Caesar himself stood motionless, his face carefully neutral, but his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the crystal decanter. That they were discussing his fate as if he were an object was understood by everyone in the room, but the legal reality of 1847 Virginia made his opinion irrelevant. "Gentlemen," Harrison said finally, his voice steadier than he felt, "I believe we have the makings of a truly historic game." An atmosphere of tension so thick that even the crackling fire seemed muted was created by the decision to proceed with the wager. Arguing that no game of chance should determine the fate of innocent lives, Judge Peaton had attempted one final protest. But Harrison's mind was made up. The combination of bourbon, competitive pride, and what he saw as an opportunity to assert ultimate dominance over his social circle had overridden his better judgment. Despite his moral reservations, Dr. Fitzgerald found himself drawn into the proceedings by sheer fascination with the psychological drama unfolding. A man who had spent decades studying human nature through the lens of medical practice, he recognized that he was witnessing something unprecedented, a moment where the fundamental power structures of their society were being tested in the most personal possible way. With elaborate precision, Marcus began shuffling the cards, his movements almost hypnotic in the lamplight. 5-card stud, he announced. "One hand, winner takes all. Are we in agreement on the terms?" Harrison nodded, though his mouth had gone dry. "If I win, I keep Margaret and gain ownership of Caesar. If you win, you gain the right to marry Margaret and I retain ownership of Caesar." "Precisely," Marcus confirmed. "Though I should mention one additional detail. Caesar will deal the cards." Through the room, this suggestion sent another shock. Virtually unheard of was having an enslaved person deal the cards for a game with such enormous stakes. But characteristically manipulative was Marcus' reasoning. Who better to ensure fairness than someone whose own fate hangs in the balance? Caesar has every incentive to deal honestly. Visibly shaking were Caesar's hands as he took the deck from Marcus. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The one to determine the outcome would be the man whose life was being wagered. As Caesar moved to the head of the table, something in the enslaved man's eyes that he had never seen before was noticed by Harrison. Not fear exactly, but a kind of cold calculation. With agonizing slowness, the cards were dealt. Precise and deliberate were Caesar's movements, and Harrison found himself studying the man's face for any sign of manipulation, but carefully neutral remained Caesar's expression. Entirely on the mechanics of the deal were his dark eyes focused. The 10 of hearts was Harrison's first card, dealt face down. A strong start that sent a surge of confidence through his chest was his face-up card, the King of Spades. The Jack of Diamonds face-up was received by Marcus while his whole card remained hidden. The King of Hearts was given to Harrison in the second round of face-up cards, a pair of kings showing. The Queen of Diamonds was received by Marcus, giving him a potential straight draw. Almost unbearable became the tension in the room as the implications of each card became clear. "Pair of kings bets," Caesar announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Nearly half of his evening's winnings was the $500 Harrison pushed into the center of the table. Without hesitation, Marcus matched the bet, his eyes never leaving Harrison's face. The moment that changed everything was the third face-up card. The 10 of Spades was received by Harrison, giving him 2 pair, kings, and tens. It was a very strong hand, strong enough that Harrison felt his confidence soar. But the 10 of Diamonds was received by Marcus, which combined with his Jack and Queen of Diamonds suggested the possibility of a straight. 2 pair bets, Caesar announced. The remainder of his money, over $300, was pushed into the pot by Harrison, and he looked directly at Marcus. "All in." Again, Marcus smiled that cold smile and matched the bet. "Call." Both men's fates were sealed by the final face-up card. The King of Clubs was received by Harrison, giving him a full house, kings over tens. An extraordinarily strong hand, one that would win the vast majority of poker hands ever played, it was. So powerful was the surge of triumph that he felt that he nearly laughed out loud. But the 9 of Diamonds was received by Marcus. With the Jack, Queen, and 10 of Diamonds already showing, plus the 9 of Diamonds, Marcus now had 4 cards to a straight flush. An unbeatable hand he would have if his hole card was either the 8 of diamonds or the King of diamonds. Completely silent fell the room. Though later everyone would swear they could still hear it drumming against the windows, even the rain seemed to have stopped. So tightly was Judge Peaton gripping the arms of his chair that his knuckles had gone white. Altogether had Dr. Fitzgerald stopped breathing. At his own cards, Harrison stared, trying to calculate the odds. An incredibly strong hand was a full house. Minimal were the chances of Marcus holding exactly the card he needed, but the stakes were so enormous that even a small possibility felt terrifying. "Gentlemen," Caesar said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "it's time to reveal the hole cards." Flipping his 10 of hearts, Harrison did so, confirming his full house. "Kings over tens," he announced, though his voice cracked slightly. With agonizing slowness, Marcus reached for his hole card. As they touched the edge of the card, his fingers seemed to tremble. As he lifted it and turned it over, the entire room held its breath. The 8 of diamonds. A straight flush was had by Marcus. 8, 9, 10, Jack, and Queen of diamonds. In poker, only a royal flush beats a straight flush, and Harrison was not holding a royal flush. More profound than anything any of them had ever experienced was the silence that followed. Of a world fundamentally changing, of assumptions being shattered, of consequences so vast they couldn't be immediately comprehended was the silence. As if they might somehow rearrange themselves, Harrison stared at the cards. Like a cosmic joke now felt his full house, which moments before had seemed like a guaranteed victory. On the turn of a single card, he had wagered his daughter's future, and he had lost. When it finally broke the silence, Marcus's voice was soft, but carried absolute authority. "Gentlemen, I believe we have a winner." Like poison spreading through clear water, the true magnitude of what had transpired began to sink in the hours that followed the game's conclusion. Long after the other men had departed, Harrison sat motionless at the poker table, staring at the cards that had sealed his daughter's fate. Casting the room in an eerie red glow that seemed appropriate for the hellish situation he had created, the fire had burned down to embers. Near the window, Caesar had remained in the room, standing where he could watch the rain continue its relentless assault on the Virginia countryside. Even more complex had become the enslaved man's situation. While he had technically been wagered and lost, the legal realities meant that Marcus now owned him, but the practical realities meant he was still physically present at Thorngate Manor. Legal documents would be required for the transfer of his ownership, and he existed in a strange limbo until those were prepared. "Master Harrison," Caesar said finally, using the formal address that their private conversations had long ago abandoned, "what are you going to tell Miss Margaret?" From the cards, Harrison looked up, and Caesar was shocked to see tears streaming down the older man's face. Through business crises and family deaths and economic uncertainties, in all the years he had known Harrison Rutherford, he had never seen the man cry. "I don't know," Harrison whispered. "How do you tell your daughter that you've gambled away her future to a man she's never even met socially?" Staggering were the legal implications. Until she turned 21 or married, whichever came first, Harrison had absolute authority over Margaret's marriage under Virginia law. Legally binding was his agreement to the poker wager, assuming witnesses could be found to confirm the terms. For the entire game, Judge Peaton and Dr. Fitzgerald had both been present, and their reputations made them unimpeachable witnesses. But even more devastating were the social implications. Through Pennsylvania County's tight-knit plantation society, word of the poker game would inevitably spread, and the scandal would destroy not just Harrison's reputation, but potentially the standing of everyone involved. The idea that a father would gamble with his daughter's life and lose challenged fundamental assumptions about paternal responsibility and social order. With a quietly satisfied air, Marcus Bogard had departed that evening, promising to return the following day to discuss the practical arrangements of his victory. With what seemed like genuine sympathy, he had shaken Harrison's hand. But something triumphant in his eyes had suggested that this outcome had been his goal from the very beginning. Over Thorngate Manor, as dawn broke, Harrison finally forced himself to leave the study and confront the impossible task of explaining the situation to Margaret. While taking her breakfast, he found her in the morning room reading a book of poetry. As he entered, she looked up and immediately noticed his haggard appearance. "Papa, You look terrible. Were you up all night with your card game? Across from his daughter, Harrison sat down, studying her face as if trying to memorize every detail. Her mother's refined features had been inherited by Margaret, but she combined them with an intelligence and strength of character that were entirely her own. At 18, she possessed the kind of beauty that would have guaranteed her a magnificent marriage to any of the prominent families in Virginia. Now, instead of choosing among suitable suitors, she would be bound to a man she barely knew. Margaret, Harrison began, then stopped. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you tell someone that their entire future has been determined by the turn of a card? Papa, you're frightening me. What's wrong? A deep breath was taken by Harrison, and he began to explain the events of the previous evening. He tried to present the story in a way that emphasized his confidence in his hand, the reasonableness of the wager given the social customs of their time, and the unfortunate but binding nature of the outcome. But as he spoke, he watched his daughter's expression change from confusion to disbelief to a kind of cold fury that reminded him uncomfortably of Marcus Bogard's calculating stare. For several minutes, Margaret sat in complete silence when Harrison finished his explanation. Like fire, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated her auburn hair, and Harrison found himself thinking that she had never looked more like her mother than at this moment. "Let me understand this correctly," Margaret said finally, her voice deadly calm. "You wagered my future marriage against the ownership of Caesar, and you lost." Margaret, the hand was extraordinarily strong. The odds of Marcus holding the exact card he needed were. "I don't care about the odds, Papa." Margaret's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "You had no right to make such a wager, regardless of how confident you felt. The legal realities, the social customs that gave fathers ultimate authority over their daughters' marriages, the fact that most marriages in their social class were arranged for financial and political reasons anyway." Harrison tried to explain these. But even as he spoke, he realized how hollow his argument sounded. From the table, Margaret stood up, her breakfast untouched. "When is Master Bogard coming to claim his prize?" The coldness in her voice when she said prize made Harrison wince. "This afternoon, most likely. We need to discuss the practical arrangements." "The practical arrangements?" Margaret repeated. "How thoughtful of you both to consider the practical aspects of my bondage." Without another word, she left the room, and Harrison was left alone with the devastating realization that he had not only lost his daughter's future but had likely destroyed their relationship forever. Precisely at 2 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus Bogard arrived at Thorngate Manor. Dressed in his finest clothes and carrying himself with the air of a man who had achieved a significant victory. A thin, nervous man named Silas Crawford, who carried a leather satchel filled with legal documents, was a lawyer from Richmond who accompanied him. In the same study where the poker game had taken place, Harrison received them, though the room felt entirely different in the harsh light of day. The cards had been cleared away, but the smell of tobacco smoke and bourbon seemed to have soaked into the very walls, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and threatening. "Harrison, my dear friend," Marcus began, settling into the same chair he had occupied the night before, "I hope you've had time to process our new arrangement." "I've had time to regret it," Harrison replied bluntly. "But a gentleman honors his debts." "Indeed he does," Marcus smiled, that cold smile again. "Now, Mr. Crawford here has prepared the necessary documents to formalize our agreement, the marriage contract, the transfer of Caesar's ownership papers, and various other legal necessities." Across the poker table, the lawyer spread the documents, and Harrison was struck by how thoroughly Marcus had anticipated this outcome. Expertly prepared were the papers, covering every possible legal contingency. That Marcus had consulted with legal experts well before the poker game was clear, suggesting a level of premeditation that made Harrison's blood run cold. "There is one matter we need to discuss," Harrison said as he reviewed the marriage contract. "Margaret is resistant to this arrangement." A chuckle came from Marcus. "I would expect nothing less from a spirited young woman, but I'm confident that once she gets to know me better, she'll come to appreciate the advantages of our union." "And if she refuses?" "She can't refuse, Harrison. Under Virginia law, you have absolute authority over her marriage until she reaches 21. The contract we're signing today makes that authority legally binding." A soft knock at the study door interrupted the conversation. But his movement seemed different from the night before. Caesar entered carrying a tea service. Where he had been trembling with tension during the poker game, he now moved with a kind of resigned dignity that was somehow more unsettling. "Master Harrison," Caesar said, setting down the tea service, "Miss Margaret would like to speak with you and Master Bogard." A clench was felt in Harrison's stomach. "Tell her we're in the middle of business discussions. She said to tell you that this business concerns her directly and she has a right to be heard." Intrigued, Marcus looked. "By all means, let's hear what the young lady has to say." With the bearing of a queen approaching a throne, Margaret entered the study. From her morning dress into a formal gown of deep blue silk that emphasized her natural dignity and beauty, she had changed. Years to her appearance were added by her hair, arranged in an elaborate style, making her look more like a woman of the world than a sheltered plantation daughter. "Master Bogard," she said with perfect courtesy, "I understand that congratulations are in order." Slightly, Marcus stood and bowed. "Miss Rutherford, the congratulations should go to me. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate." "Indeed," Margaret replied, her voice carrying undertones that only Harrison recognized as dangerous. "I wanted to discuss the terms of our engagement with both of you present." That the terms had already been decided, Harrison started to protest, but Margaret held up a hand to silence him. "I understand that legally I have no choice in this matter," she continued. "A prize to be claimed has been made of me by Papa's gambling debt. Much like Caesar here has become your property." Toward Caesar, who was still standing near the door, she gestured. "But I wanted you to understand exactly what kind of wife you're acquiring, Master Bogard." Clearly enjoying the confrontation, Marcus leaned forward. "Please enlighten me." Smiled did Margaret, and Harrison recognized the expression as one she had inherited from her mother. "Beautiful, but absolutely ruthless. I will honor the legal obligations that Papa's foolishness has created. I will marry you in a ceremony that satisfies Virginia law and social convention. I will live in your house and bear the title of your wife." "That sounds perfectly reasonable," Marcus said. But Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "I will never willingly share your bed. I will never bear your children. I will spend every day of our marriage making you regret the moment you sat down at that poker table. You may own me legally, Master Bogard, but you will never possess me." Even more profound than the moment when Marcus had revealed his winning hand was the silence that followed. As if he wanted to disappear entirely looked the lawyer, Silas Crawford. By the door, Caesar remained motionless, but Harrison could see something that might have been approval in his eyes. Finally cracked was Marcus' composure, revealing a flash of genuine anger. "Miss Rutherford, I think you misunderstand the nature of marriage in our society. A wife's duties are clearly defined both legally and morally." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Margaret replied. "But I also understand that while you may be able to force me into marriage, you cannot force me to be happy about it. And an unhappy wife, Master Bogard, can make life very unpleasant for her husband." Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Pennsylvania County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. The arrival of an unexpected visitor interrupted the confrontation. Approaching the house could be heard Judge Peaton's carriage, and moments later, the elderly jurist entered the study without waiting to be announced. Grave was his face, and he carried an official-looking document in his hand. "Harrison, Marcus," he said grimly, "we have a problem." The entire atmosphere in the room was changed by Judge Peaton's unexpected arrival. Drawn and pale was the elderly man's face, and his usual composure had been replaced by barely controlled agitation. He glanced around the room, taking in the legal documents spread across the poker table, Margaret's defiant posture, and Caesar's silent presence near the door. "Cornelius," Harrison said, rising from his chair. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Judge Peaton replied, his voice heavy with implication. "Is that our little poker game last night has attracted some very unwelcome attention?" He held up the document he had been carrying, an official writ bearing the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia. This arrived at my office 2 hours ago. It's a formal inquiry from the Virginia Attorney General's office into what they're calling irregular gambling activities involving human property and potentially coercive marriage contracts. Completely white went Marcus' face. How could they possibly know about? Because, Judge Peaton interrupted, someone reported it. Someone who was present last night. Someone who witnessed the entire game and understood the legal implications. To Caesar, who stood near the door with the same dignified composure he had maintained throughout the morning's confrontations, all eyes turned. But now there was something else in his expression, something that might have been satisfaction. "You," Harrison whispered. "You reported this." Directly, Caesar met his master's gaze, and for the first time in their relationship, there was no deference in his eyes. "Master Harrison, you taught me to read and write. You taught me about business and law and the importance of documentation. Did you think I wouldn't understand the legal implications of what happened last night?" Like a physical blow hit the room the revelation. To his feet, Marcus jumped, his gentleman's facade finally crumbling completely. "You treacherous." "Careful, Master Bogard," Caesar interrupted calmly. "You may legally own me now, but Virginia law still protects enslaved people from physical assault, especially when witnesses are present." Into a chair, Judge Peaton sank, the full magnitude of the situation becoming clear. "Caesar, what exactly did you report?" "I reported that 4 prominent Virginia gentlemen engaged in a poker game where human lives were wagered as stakes. I provided detailed descriptions of the game, the participants, and the agreements made. I also included sworn testimony about the coercive nature of the marriage contract being forced upon Miss Margaret." Frantically shuffling through his papers began the lawyer, Silas Crawford. "This could invalidate all of our documents. If the Attorney General's office determines that the poker game constituted an illegal form of human trafficking." "Which it did," Margaret interjected smoothly. "Caesar, you brilliant, wonderful man." In complete shock, Harrison stared at Caesar. "But why? If this investigation proceeds, you could be punished. Severe consequences could be faced by enslaved people who make accusations against their masters." "True," Caesar agreed. "But I realized something last night while I was dealing those cards, Master Harrison. I realized that I was tired of being property. Tired of being wagered and traded like livestock. And I realized that if I was going to be punished for speaking truth to power, I might as well make sure the truth was worth the punishment." To the center of the room, Caesar walked, his movements deliberate and dignified. "You see, while you gentlemen were focused on your cards and your bourbon, I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about Miss Margaret's future and about my own. And I realized that this poker game represented everything that's wrong with our society. The idea that human beings can be owned, traded, and wagered like objects. Like a caged animal, Marcus was pacing the room. "This is insane. The poker game was between gentlemen. It was conducted according to agreed-upon rules. Rules that treated human beings as gambling stakes," Judge Peaton said grimly. "Caesar, as a legal expert, I have to tell you that your report has created a situation that could destroy all of us. The Attorney General's office doesn't just investigate these matters, they prosecute them." A folded document was produced by Caesar from his jacket. "There's something else you should know. This morning, I also sent detailed letters to 3 newspaper editors, one in Richmond, one in Charleston, and one in Washington. The story of last night's poker game will be published in tomorrow's editions." Absolute was the silence that followed. As if the floor had dropped away beneath his feet, felt Harrison. A criminal investigation was one thing. It could potentially be handled quietly with lawyers and political connections smoothing over the difficulties. But public knowledge throughout the South would be made by newspaper coverage of the scandal. "You've destroyed us all," Dr. Fitzgerald whispered. "No," Caesar replied calmly. "You destroyed yourselves. I simply documented it." To stand beside Caesar, Margaret moved, and Harrison was struck by how natural their alliance appeared. "Caesar, how did you know how to do all this?" "The legal reports, the newspaper contacts." For the first time since entering the room, Caesar smiled. "Miss Margaret, You weren't the only one receiving an education in this house. While Master Harrison was teaching me about plantation finances, I was also learning about law, politics, and the power of information. I've been corresponding with abolitionists in Richmond for over a year, learning about legal strategies and political organizing. Apparent was becoming the true brilliance of Caesar's strategy. A legal situation that was impossible to resolve quietly had been created by him by reporting the poker game to state authorities. Too prominent to ignore were the men involved, but too scandalous to handle through normal channels was the nature of their activities. And he had ensured that any attempt to suppress the investigation would itself become a scandal by involving the newspapers. Around the room, Harrison looked, realizing that his attempt to demonstrate his power and dominance had instead triggered a chain of events that threatened to destroy everything he had spent his life building. The plantation, his social standing, his political connections, his relationship with his daughter, all of it now hung in the balance because of a single night's gambling. "There's more," Judge Peaton continued, his voice growing even more grave. "The Attorney General's office has indicated that they're considering broader charges: human trafficking, coercive marriage contracts, and potentially conspiracy to violate Virginia's gambling statutes. These aren't civil matters, gentlemen. These are criminal charges that could result in prison sentences." To the window, Caesar walked, looking out at the plantation grounds where dozens of enslaved people were working in the fields. "You know what the most ironic part of this whole situation is?" he asked. "You taught me everything I needed to know to bring you down. You educated me. You trusted me with your business secrets. You treated me almost like an equal in private conversations. And then you wagered me in a poker game like I was a prize bull. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe everything was brought to light, or could there be more victims we'll never know about? Leave your comment down below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this one, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. I'll see you in the next video.